It's Check Raise Poker's 6 Max Super Series. Hi everybody, welcome to Poker with Kids, episode number 46. This time just up at Burleigh Heads, and you can see just in the background up here the fun of Surfers Paradise. And what we're looking at today, looking back at the recently completed Check Raise Poker 6 Max series. And before we get to actually looking at how I did in the series, I ended up playing 3 events. Ended up playing the Win the Button event, the 5-card draw event, and the PLO 5 event. But I actually want to talk a little bit about the series as a whole. For the most part, the usual sort of thing you'd expect from Check Raise Poker, a well-run series. They're a league of their own. They run their own events at pubs and clubs around the place, so they have their own players in terms of the majority of players that were at the event. We also have obviously people that play sometimes and play in the bigger series. I suppose in some ways, like I'm one of those sort of players that plays in some of the bigger series, but also a lot of the I suppose more well-known players on the Brisbane Gold Coast poker scene, Queensland poker scene generally, that play in the bigger series as well. They normally turn out for these kind of series as well. So they've got a decent base, not quite as big as the sort of someone like the APT, which is like an amalgam, which is the poker tour that works across a number of leagues. But having said that, it is still a pretty big series. And the thing that I really liked about this series was they played not just the usual series of events. It wasn't just the standard 14 different variations of No Limit Hold'em with a, accumulator, bounty, all sorts of different twists that you can do on the standard sort of No Limit Hold'em tournament. So it's good to see some variation there. In particular, the 5-card draw was probably the event that I liked the most. But there were a couple of things that I suppose had issue with just in general, and as well based on what happened in the events that I was playing in. One thing that was a problem, what I think is a problem, is the player of the series. I understand the rationale for having it. They definitely want to encourage people to play in more events. However, given that they're paying just the top 5 places, it's really only, from the outset, you're really only looking at sort of 20 to 25 people who are really even in contention. They're the players that have the bankroll, that play lots of events, that essentially play poker full time, that can afford to buy into 15 of the 19 events that they had on the schedule or something like that, so that they get points for playing in events, and if they run deep in a few of them, they get extra points, and that puts them up near the top of the leaderboard in contention for the player of the series prize money. So although it's got good intentions, I don't think it's really something that is geared towards the everyday player. If you're just the person that plays in a regular Check Raise Poker league, and you thought, okay, they've got a big series on, I'll play in a couple of events, you really have no shot at that player of the series and the player of the series money. They're also taking 8% out of each prize pool, which adds to the rake. Typically these events you're looking at sort of 15 to 20% rake for events. So for example, there was a $60 event, $50 went to the prize pool, $10 in a rake. You add another 8% out of that, that's another $4 that's coming out of the $50 that was going, or apparently going to the prize pool, so now it's only $46 going to the prize pool out of 60. So it's close to 25% going in rake, which is pretty steep as far as rake is concerned. Also, because it then makes that player of the series a significant amount of money. It's not just a few $100 or maybe $1,000 or $2,000 for first place. It's now close to 5 figures. That then encourages those players with the bankroll to then play in all these events, multi-table, and then you create problems with other events. So this is where the issue with the player of the series comes. You get players that are multi-tabling, multi-eventing. So what will happen is you'll have a player that, for example, might be in 2 or 3 events at the same time. They'll play one event, and they'll play a level, let's say they'll play a level of that event, or if it's deep in one event, they'll play the event that they're deep in, and they'll just let their stack blind out at the other table, which seems like a bad decision as far as their money is concerned. But when they return to that table, you then end up in a situation where a vast majority of those players are in essentially a push or fold mode. So you have a player that isn't there for 20 minutes, they turn up, first hand they sit down, and they're, okay, I'm all in, or they re-raise, again, depending on the tournament. For example, if it was like the Omaha and it's pot limit, they can only raise the pot, so it's a case of, okay, I bet the maximum, so all my chips are going in. We even had some people played in the 5-card draw event that turn up, they've gone, oh, 5 cards, what's this game, how do I play it? So they've just registered for an event, they're happy to play it, they don't even know what the event is, they just want to get the minimum points for playing in the event, just the participation points, and then if they manage to double up or triple up and they've got a stack, then they can work with that and then potentially, make the cash and get some more points on top of that. But it creates a farcical situation. I know in the PLO 5 event, I was actually still in the, again, another issue in terms of scheduling. They had the 5-card draw event on the same day as the PLO 5 event. They're two events that I definitely wanted to play in. I was still in the 5-card draw event when the PLO 5 event started. So at one point I was actually one of these multi-tablers. But the problem being that you can obviously only be in one place physically at a time. So there was time when I just missed hands at one table or the other because I was playing the other event. But at the PLO 5 event, there was a case where it's a 6-handed table. We had five stacks at the table. 2 of those stacks were players that were still in the main event because that was still going on its final day. They had their stacks that were blinding out. I was flipping between the PLO 5 and the 5-card draw, and there were 2 other players on the table. So essentially it was those 2 other players until I got back to play a hand or 2. They were just sitting there happily dealing out cards, dealing out boards, whatever, and just alternating chips between them and taking blinds off the dead stacks. So it made it a little bit well, I suppose in a way we did, by multi-tabling you brought it on yourself, but it did make it not really the kind of tournament that I'd really be looking forward to. If I'm sitting there, if I want to play a 6-max PLO 5 tournament, I don't want to have essentially be playing heads up with 3 dead stacks. Okay, it's good to pick up a handful of chips each round, but you actually want to play poker. That's why you're there, rather than, okay, we'll just sit for an hour or 2 until these other players come back, and then they decide to sit down, play one hand, they shove, and it's a case of, oh, do I win that hand? If I win that hand, I've got chips. If I don't win that hand, I'm back to square one, potentially even being out of the tournament. So that's a big issue that I have with the Player of the Series and multi-tabling in live events. Having said that, the other issue with the non-standard events is, again, having TDs that not only are there but actually know the rules. In the case of the 5-card draw event, I think there are really only there was the main TD that was running it. He took breaks every now and again, as understandably he doesn't want to be there 3-4 hours at a stretch, but you think he could take breaks with in line with the tournament, who have breaks every 2 hours. There are other times where he was still there, but he'd gone down to look at the main event that was still going on and things like that. So you'd be standing around for 2 or 3 minutes waiting for the TD to come back. The other TDs that were around are like, oh, I know Hold'em, but I don't know 5-card draw. They don't know rules. They can't answer questions. So you're left just being stuck waiting. The clock doesn't stop, and you're just waiting for the TD that's running the event to come back. So that was a bit of a disappointment. But outside of that, generally a well-run series, as I said. Good to see a variety of events on the schedule, and again, from my own perspective, a little bit disappointing. I kind of went deep, but not deep enough in the events to make the money. So 3 events and 0 for 3 cashes. I'll get to the details about that in a little bit. But yeah, overall, a good series. Again, they also had issues, I think, with posting some of the results on the final day. Had internet issues or something at the venue. Again, you think in today's day and age, even if there's internet issues with the venue, you could solve it with phones and hotspotting and stuff like that. But anyway, they were the negatives, but also plenty of positives from the event. So well done to Czech Rays for running that series. Here's the trophies that remain on Sunday night from the series. Only a handful left by this stage, and one of the many banners this time featuring Chris Moneymaker, who was out here in years gone by. And our start sack for the Win the Button event. So I ended up playing 3 events in the Czech Rays Poker Series, and that started on the Thursday night with the Win the Button event. I got there a little bit late, started in the 200-400 level, and for this event recap, we could use the style of Gus Hansen, every hand revealed. So, first hand that I actually played, we had, I was in the big blind, obviously 200-400 blinds, raised by under the gun +1 to 1200, called by the button. I looked down at the 8-5 of spades, decide that we are going to defend our big blind. The flop comes down a potentially good looking for my hand, ace of spades, 6 of spades, queen of diamonds. It's again $1,200 bet, $1,200 chip bet, which gets called, and I call as well. The turn brings the king of clubs, so you have ace, 6, queen, king. There's a bet of 2,600. I decide that that's enough for me. I fold. The other player calls. The river pairs the board with the queen. So we've got ace, 6, queen, king, queen, and the big bet on the river, I think it was about 4,500 or 5,000, and the other player called and got shown pocket kings for the full house. Second hand. This time, again, we had a raise to 1,200 in front of me and a call of 1,200. I looked down, I believe I was in the blinds as well. This time, we looked at 1 ace, we looked at 2 aces, we put in a raise, 3,500 was the raise. Everybody else said no thanks, and we took down the blinds and those 2 raises. The third hand that I played was immediately after the aces, and we had the button. Being the Win the Button tournament, I was the dealer, so after you win a hand, you got the button and you dealt. So after I won the aces pre-flop, I looked down at the next hand, 1 red queen of hearts, 1 red queen of diamonds. New player that sat down at the table. He was one of the players that had been in the main event who'd just gone on break. Sat down, first hand, decided to raise to 1,500. I repeated the same plays before, re-raised to 3,500, and he immediately, well, not immediately, but after a few seconds, went all in for his 30,000 start sack. With pocket queens, I'm not folding, so I decided to make the call, and we were off to the races as he turned over ace, king, offsuit. The board ran out with a good start for me, with a 3 and a 9 and a 9. The turn brought an 8, but the river was the dreaded ace. I was down to only 200 left, and this time I was actually in the big blind. So I was all in for less than the big blind. Didn't have a lot of choice about this one. And in the final hand, I was in the big blind with my 200 remaining. Didn't really matter, but I looked down at 6-4 offsuit. The player who was the button put in a raise after there was a limp from under the gun. They decided to make the call, and they got the fun flop of lucky 7, a lucky 7, a lucky 7, 3 sevens. It was checked through. 10 of spades on the turn to go with lucky sevens. The player who raised pre-flop put out a bet. Obviously, this one would think would be a bad sign for me. However, he turned over King Jack of Spades, so I was actually live. Still had a 6 or a 4 for the win. However, was not to be. Another ace on the river, and King High was good, and I'm gone. That was my With the Button tournament, and won the button once. Played 4 hands, and didn't even make it out of the 200-400 level. I was done. And here's our start stack for the 5-card draw event. The final 2 events that I played were more enjoyable, obviously, than the 10 or 15 minutes of Win the Button. But my favourite tournament of the series was the 5-card draw. Obviously, playing this as No Limit High was a little bit unusual. Personally, I would have loved it if it was a deuce to 7 triple draw or something like that. But anyway, baby steps. Maybe one day we'll get that on a schedule on a poker tour in Australia. But we'll see how that goes. But anyway, No Limit 5-card draw. Game I didn't have too much experience with, but I did. I've had familiarity with draw poker, and quite a few of the players were completely new to the game and really had no idea. As I mentioned in the intro, good that they had that on the schedule. You had players that really had not a lot of idea, and I think it really made an advantage for me for the tournament. However, having said that, given that I wasn't too familiar with No Limit Draw, in terms of playing high myself, one thing I think I suffered from was a bit of lack of aggression generally. I know as a default, generally as when I'm playing cash, I tend to be a little bit more conservative compared to a lot of other players. The style that works for me in cash, obviously in tournaments you have to be more aggressive with blinds going up and things like that, and obviously I've adjusted my Hold'em game to be more aggressive than I am in tournaments and cash games, but it's one of those things that I think I understand the theory, but I didn't really put it into practice very well in the tournament. So struggled with aggression, tended to play a bit more of a tight passive rather than a tight aggressive game. A lot more sort of calling rather than raising, and essentially having to make hands to win the pot rather than being able to bet players off the pot or win the pot by having the best hand. Also, there was something again that I struggled with related to that. One of the big stacks, who actually ended up coming second overall in the tournament, was at my table for the vast majority of the event, and she picked up a big stack early and again used that aggressively and was happy to raise with what I'd consider relatively weak holdings, but given that she was the aggressor and she had been playing, lots of hands, it was one of these spots where you're either putting in lots of chips and not making hands and essentially losing chips, or you're just folding a lot and not playing a lot of hands and then just letting her take blinds or in this case antes on a regular basis. So the rich get richer, and he was stuck with one of the short to average stacks and just watching the chips go over to one side of the table. So that was what I played on her part, not so much with countering everybody else. But having said that, I did make the final table, which was obviously good. Also got a bit of whole card footage in terms of looking through the event, so we'll get to some commentary on that. But one big hand, which is really my big downfall actually to the eventual winner of the tournament, who came into the main final table, was a pretty short stack as well. I was actually, I think, the shortest or second shortest at the final table. And this hand I was under the gun, or not under the gun, but next to the button first act. So after the antes, which were relatively high, I looked down at pocket kings with 3 random cards. I decided to limp and call the raise that this other player made. We both drew 3, so the chances are with pocket kings I'm ahead, and I didn't improve, still just had pocket kings, and he decided to put in reasonably hefty bet after the draw. And the mistake I made is rather than just letting it go, I decided to call, thinking that, okay, he's just using position to bluff me out of the pot. And of course, he made two pair and turned over jacks and fours, and that was good enough to win the hand. And I was down to just a handful of chips. Ended up on the final hand for me, I think it ended up being 5 ways at a 7-handed table. I really didn't have a lot of choice as to which hand I chose, but ended up going with a draw 2, 3, 4, 5, which in terms of high is not actually the ideal draw. Yes, it's the straight draw with 8 outs, or theoretically 8 outs. However, the way that a lot of players have been playing is they've been keeping their aces. So often you have players with a pair and an ace that actually keep the pair and the ace and only draw 2. Rather than just keeping the pair and pitching 3 and drawing 3. So yes, it's one of those ones where in theory I probably had 8 outs. I think in practice it was probably a lot less than 8 outs. Regardless, I missed anyway. I think I ended up with 8 high or something like that. Would have been fantastic for our Deuce to 7 single draw tournament. But there was not to be. Ended up finishing that event in 7th place. And unfortunately, out of the money they had... I think with entries and re-entries, it was 29 entries and re-entries. I think it was 24 players, 5 re-entries or something along those lines. So they would pay top 3. So making the final table, even though it was good to make the final table, unfortunately didn't make the cash and obviously didn't win the trophy that I was hoping to in the pre-tournament video. So anyway, let's have a look at some 5-card draw in action. So here's some hands. This time, nothing much. Into the muck. Again, not much to see. Into the muck. This time, this is one where we pick up 3 spades and everybody checked. We decided to draw 2. And lo and behold, we pick up the flush. Pretty lucky with that draw. So we put in a raise and show the flush, take down the pot. That was a bit of lucky. And ordinarily, if you want to draw to a flush or a straight, it's much better to only have a 1-card draw rather than a 2-card draw. So a bit lucky to get there with a 2-card draw on that occasion. Again, here we have a pair, not much to go with, just a pair of 4s. Another example, no pair, no draw, no play. This time, again, not much to see. Into the muck. And this time we got something a little bit interesting. We pick ourselves up a pair of queens, unimproved after the draw, and again, into the muck. This time we pick up something a bit interesting. We actually had a pair of aces. However, again, this is one where you need to look at the draws that your opponent has. Unimproved pair of aces facing a bet after the draw, and it's simply a fold. Again, here another pair. Again, you can take it to the first draw, especially if it's cheap with a small pair. But again, nothing, so it's a muck. The gut shot draw, not really worth doing, so it's again into the muck. Again, another potential gut shot draw. We draw to the 5, but we're not going to draw. It's just a straight out fold. So as you can see, there are a lot of hands where we don't really make much. Here we've got ourselves a pair of 6s, but again, facing action into the muck. This is our chip stack on the break and at the final table. And the chip stack heading to the final table, unfortunately, didn't last anywhere near as long as I'd like. And this is our starting stack for PLO 5 card. And PLO 5 on the first break. The other end that I played was one of the later ones on the Sunday, the Pillow 5 card PLO. I was actually still in the draw tournament at this stage, so I was actually multi-tabling this one, and had to mentally readjust each time we're going 5 cards. Are we throwing some away? Are we keeping them? So yeah, it was a little bit of a challenge from that respect. Also had quite a few players that were also multi-tabling, whether in the main event or another event. So as I mentioned in the little intro bit, a little bit of frustration with you're already playing as a 6-max table that's short-handed, and then you had a number of dead stacks that weren't playing. So you had like a 5 or 6-handed table that might have only had 2 or 3 players physically at it. Whole bunch of dead stacks you still had to deal cards out to, and then okay, they muck before any betting happens, but you're still sitting there. You've got to deal out all those cards, and then okay, it essentially becomes a fight between 2 or 3 players for the blinds that the other players put in if they put in anything. Extra little frustration with some of the players who were, I don't know if some of them had played regular PLO before, but there was one player who I ended up on, who amazingly actually ended up coming second. I think it was just, I don't think she realised that you needed to use 2 cards to win the hand. And of course she was raising with the good Hold'em hands where you had a pair in your hand, even if it might be, a pair of 9s, because, it's a pair, but PLO 5, it's not such a great hand to just have a pair if you don't have anything to go with it. And I know there's one hand where she happily turned over her hand and said, I have a 6, I have a straight. And I kind of went, well, hang on a minute, what other card do you have to go with a 6? And she showed her other cards, and okay, she did have a 9 that actually made the straight, but she was happily going, I've got a 6, so I've got a straight, so it's a chop. Not, it was only when I pointed out, hang on a minute, you need 2 cards, that she actually noticed, actually I do have a 9 that can make a straight for me in that particular hand. But yeah, the fun part was she actually ended up coming second. So interesting tournament. Again, with entries and re-entries, they had 29 players, so they had, again, only paying top 3. I actually bubbled the event, got down to the final 8, didn't make the final table, one off the final table, or bubbled the final table anyway. So again, one of those frustrating deepish runs that doesn't quite come in, but again, good to see a bit of variation and a bit of something different than just no limit hold'em on a tournament schedule. So well done Check Raise Poker for doing that, and hopefully we'll see more of these type of events in the future. That's going to wrap up vlog number 46 featuring the Check Raise 6-Max Super Series. Hopefully you like the video. Again, like, share and subscribe as always, and hopefully see you at a poker table soon or on another poker video. Thanks for watching.